Hi, it's Kirby Summers. It is still January 15th. For those of you who joined me on my test run, which I recorded in the middle of the night, it was a lot of fun to do a live. What I did realize, and I want to thank everyone who showed up, is that the microphone that I use to record my podcast on YouTube, which are pre-recorded, works much better than it did on my live stream. And so I have to go and pick up another microphone. So I can't do another live stream until I pick it up and connect it. That said, I am going to go ahead and give you guys another insight into some of my work. And that said, I want to say that I am really loving the feedback because you guys are really connecting the dots. You seem to know what I'm saying and you're following. Now, as it pertains to my last podcast, where I spoke about Marlo Thomas's father, I want to be clear that what I said was that he had an unusual S preference for a certain activity. And yes, I did say that he founded the Children's Hospital, which is very suspicious from where we sit present day. However, the S preference that he had to do with an activity that I felt was so disgusting that I did not want to just like either spell it or refer to it on my podcast. But because I think that the gist of it, nobody really understood what I meant. I'm going to say that it involves the bodily function that is the least pleasant that Danny Thomas, Marlowe's father, had an obsession with, which is called a fetish. Okay, I'm going to move on now. We're going to talk about um, other people because I realize you guys are good when I talk about people from the past. Who are not necessarily in the news today, but who, frankly, form an ongoing, almost unbroken line into what's going on in present day. And before I get started, Robert B., a shout out to you for being kind enough to go to my website and to make a contribution as a super thanks. It's very, very appreciated. And to everyone who subscribed and who bothered to give this a like, many thanks because, slowly we can help the algorithm and everyone will be able to start connecting even more dots. So this is actually a portion of my Deconstructing Wexy series that I have on my Substack. And it includes Charles Lindbergh, the very famous it's really interesting. I pause because what I've discovered about Charles Lindbergh, who, as I think many of you are aware, was uh, a famous aviator. However, there was an incident in his life, and that was the kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh Jr., his child. But I'm going to be walking you through this because, yes, it is connected into the Wexy world. Now, what I did with Wexy was I began when he wasn't even conceived, when his parents were in Russia. And And so this would be part 7 for those of you who are on my Substack. If you want to read this carefully, you can do that there. So I'm going to basically try to read as much of this as I can. And clearly, I do look at your questions, and if I can, I'll answer them. And if I can't, I keep it in my mind so that I can clear things up in a future podcast. So I begin. In part 6 of Deconstructing Wexner, we begin to unravel how Bella Kabakov, and that would be Wexy's mom, and her maiden name was Kabakov, and the life of her yet to be born son, became enmeshed with elite families such as the Rothschilds, the Strausses, the Macy's, the Strausses being the family that created the department store we all know as Macy's, who in fact always sponsor the Thanksgiving Day parade in New York City, the Guggenheims, and the Bloomingdale dynasty. In part 3, this author discussed Wexy's long-term friendship with former astronaut and one-time Ohio Senator John Glenn, as well as delving into early NASA space missions led by Nazi scientists through Operation Paperclip. Glenn, as you may recall, was a passenger on Epi's 727, dubbed the LOLITA Express, on September 8th, 1996, along with Alan Dershowitz, ostensibly to celebrate Wexy's 59th birthday. And I included the page where that flight log is included. Now, what I want to say about John Glenn is I found him also in my series on the Beatles, who I believe strongly were indeed a construct. And he comes up as a very close friend of the 3-letter agency operative who was running the Franklin situation. So that, in fact, while I've heard people say that there are no commingling, let's say, the names do not show up, let's say, from Franklin to Epi. Well, that's not true, because John Glenn is one name that comes up. And there are others that I have discovered that sometimes I will add to my Patreon to say, hey, this name comes up in both of these now infamous cases that we're discussing and re-examining. But so there is some crossover. I'm gonna just continue. So, and just one more thing, and as we know, or at least some of us know, our former astronaut, John Glenn, also became the senator of Ohio. And Ohio is, of course, Wexy's birthplace. The other thing I want to make sure I emphasize is that whether I'm listening to mainstream or I'm listening to indie media, what most people say, which gets my blood boiling, is that Wexy was a victim of blackmail. And I will say to you, no, I do not believe that. Not only do I not believe it, I know this not to be true. And how do I know this not to be true? Because Wexy and my abuser's father were very, very close. And I know that my abuser's father, and in fact, my abuser himself, had ties to the intel operations. Okay. And they tend to do business with other intel operators. And there are other reasons I know that I can't go into here, but that I do write about on my Substack. In any event, after Epi's arrest on July 6th, 2019, the public became aware of many of the institutions and schools which he was involved with. And among these was the New York Academy of Art, co-founded by Andy Warhol and Stuart Pivar. This seemingly innocuous private graduate level school in Lower Manhattan allowed Epi to sit on its board from 1987 to 1994 and welcomed him as a collector of student-made and commissioned art. However, Epi arrived at New York Academy of Art, and how he arrived at it, who pulled him in, has never been disclosed. However, it will be clear at the conclusion of this installment that this too is part of Wexy's world. Moreover, it is forever linked to NASA and their missions, and shockingly, in what was dubbed the crime of the century, the 1932 infamous kidnapping and gruesome murder of 20-month-old Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr. And throughout the article, I have photographs to help guide you through the story because there's a lot of meat on this bone, frankly. On March 1st, 1932, the nation's attention was focused on the sensational kidnapping of Charlie. I want you to pay attention. This is not history that you know. This is history that has been shaped into a narrative for the public. There are layers to this that I will be sharing with you today. So the nation was focused on this sensational kidnapping of the 20-month-old baby of famed aviator Charles Lindbergh, who was born in 1902 and who lasted through 1974, and his wife Anne Morrow Lindbergh, born in 1906 until 2001. And of note, Anne is the socialite daughter of Dwight Morrow. And why is he important? He is important because he was a partner in J.P. Morgan. All right, so we know the name J.P. Morgan because ultimately it became known as J.P. Morgan Chase, and it became exposed during the Epi case as financing the so-called operation. And Lindbergh basically became an international celebrity after flying his plane christened the Spirit of St. Louis in 1927 from Roosevelt Field here in New York City and Long Island. And then he flew this to Paris. He had flown the 3,600-mile journey in 33 and a half hours. And as he landed at approximately 10:22 p.m., a crowd of thousands cheered his arrival. Now, I included here a photograph of Lindbergh, who's a tall, slim guy standing next to one of the Guggenheims. So then the Guggenheim that became his benefactor was Harry Guggenheim. And Harry was born in 1890, and he survived until 1910. I'm sorry, 1971. I thank you for understanding that I have to use alternate words, and some of you have been joking about it, so I know you do understand it. So I go on to talk about the Guggenheims, and I then show a photograph of the Guggenheims and then show a family tree of the Guggenheims. And Meyer Guggenheim, 1828 through 1905, was the patriarch. It was the Guggenheim family was basically once the wealthiest family in the entire world. Meyer and his wife Barbara had 11 children, and among these was Benjamin, who was born again 1865, 1912. He was a philandering husband who has been described as a blatant skirt chaser, similar to former President Bill Clinton. He was also an absent father to his three daughters, Marguerite Peggy Guggenheim, born 1898 through 1979, the art collector, an ancestor of sisters Barbara Guggenheim, former wife of Bert Fields. Bert Fields is a very famous lawyer and I will probably say something more about him before we're done with this podcast. By the way, if you haven't liked this podcast, like it now, please. Like, subscribe. And Eileen Guggenheim, New York Academy of Art Chair and Vice Chair of Prince Charles Foundation. We know that Prince Charles is now King Charles III. So we know that Eileen Guggenheim, connected to the New York Academy of Art, of which Epi sat on the board, worked hand in hand with Prince Charles Foundation. And I have told you in a previous podcast that this place was somewhere where Prince Andrew attended, Prince Charles at the time, and those photographs have been scrubbed. Okay, you cannot find them online anymore. And Benjamin died. Oh, gee, I said a four-letter word. I hope that we can get that one by in the sinking of the Titanic, a trip he undertook with his mistress, a young blonde, and a very famous courtesan, Leontine Aubert, who was born in 1887 through 1964, and who history has kindly described as a French singer. Aubert and her maid survived, having been lowered into one of the lifeboats. So if you remember when you saw the movie, if you saw the movie, lifeboats were lowered, and in fact, his mistress got on a plane. Now, the New York Times, which is a mockingbird operation, even from the earliest days, in fact, it was created to be a mockingbird operation. On their edition of April 20th of 1912, when they talk about Benjamin Guggenheim's passing on the Titanic, they talk about him as being a wonderful husband. So I included the whole article. I'm not going to read it to you, but if you are on my Substack or you plan to go on over, you'll be able to read everything. So despite his philandering and true to form with regard to the double lives, all these people lead double lives. A life not necessarily hidden from their wife and family. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But a life that is hidden from the public, so that they have Mockingbird Media to let us know what they want us to know. But they live an entirely different life from what we learn, as everyone is now kind of, eyes wide open, right? And so, because his very wealthy friends who owned the New York Times, they wrote a glowing article about his heroic efforts with the captain, with, and I mean, so they captioned this thing, a Guggenheim dying sent wife message, but in reality, he's with his girlfriend, right? What really happened in real life is that his widow, whose name is Florette, paid Aubert for her silence. In the aftermath of the tragedy, in an effort to again maintain the outward appearance of propriety. So for these people, the illusion that they presented to the world was much more important to them than the reality. So she paid off his mistress to be quiet about the fact that she had been on the ship, not just herself, but with her maid, and her husband. That did not happen. So the Strauss, Guggenheim, and Rothschild families are in fact related by marriage. Cora Gwendolyn Guggenheim, 1873 to 1959, married Louis Frank Rothschild, 1869 to 1957, on January 3rd, 1899. Louis is the founder of the investment banking firm L.F. Rothschild. Benjamin's brother, Walter Rothschild, 1892-1960, became known for merging the family-owned Abraham and Strauss stores with Fred Lazarus Jr., described in part 6 into the newly created Federated Department Stores in 1929, for whom Bella, Wexie's mother, worked. So in Ohio, Bella was hired by this line that continues to present day behind the scenes, these very wealthy families. And although they were not born into wealth, they did have an inn. And I explained the inn and certain other scandalous things that happened in Wexie's family, uh, again, on my Substack. And so Daniel Guggenheim, 1856-1930, is among the sons of Meyer and Barbara Guggenheim. On the 22nd of June, 1884, he married Florence Schloss, 1863-1944. They had 3 children, Meyer Robert Guggenheim, Harry Frank Guggenheim, and Gladys Eleanor Guggenheim Strauss. His son, Harry, became keenly interested in flying after naval service during World War I, and both father and son became avid supporters of aviation technology. Before delving into their contribution to the field of aeronautics, it is important for our understanding of the multi-generational elite to mention that Harry was friends with 7 U.S. presidents. In November 1929, President Herbert Hoover, whose one term in office, by the way, was marked by the stock market crash and the Great Depression, appointed Harry as ambassador to Cuba. Now, why is this important? Do the words Council on Foreign Relations mean anything, guys? Because now we're going there. So Harry worked alongside the newly created Council on Foreign Relations, which was begun in 1921 to, quotes around this word, safeguard American interests in Cuba. Well, and the reason is because prohibition in the United States basically had begun, and Cuba had become a playground for both the members of the elite and the US-based mobsters, right? It was a place where wealthy men, accustomed to having secret lives, could play out their wild fantasies, indulging in prostitution shows. Like, there were actually live shows. It didn't begin in Times Square. This was happening in Cuba. You can walk into a club and there would be live shows performing for, these men who had literally no moral, nothing, I don't know. It's just, and watching basically all of these live performances. So Harry remained in the post until 1933, where despite numerous outbreaks of terrorism during the reign of Cuban President Geraldo Machado, a ruthless murderer, he protected the lives and property of prominent American citizens. Another notable figure among the men close to Harry is John S. McCain, 1884 to 1945, who is the grandfather of former U.S. Senator from Arizona, John McCain III, 1936 to 2018. So we know that the name McCain, and now I went back and connected him to the Wexie side 2 generations earlier through his grandfather. And so in January of 2020, we know that Cindy McCain, his widow, famously made the assertion, oh, we all knew, everyone knew what Epi was doing. Remember that? Well, she would have known because they were part of that world. Enough said for that. So anyway, less is discussed about John McCain's involvement in the corruption scandal dubbed the Keating Five, which included, again, Ohio Senator and former astronaut John Glenn. So John Glenn has been involved in so many scandals. However, nothing is ever said. Nothing is ever said. The two, meaning John McCain and John Glenn, were among 5 senators questioned during a 1990 congressional ethics investigation regarding their connection to notorious fraudster Charles Keating, 1923 to 2014. Now, I was able to find an old newspaper that had an image of a sketch of Charles Keating Jr. and his lawyer Stephen Neal standing in front of the judge when he was being sentenced with the caption, "Financier gets 20-year term." And you will probably understand that the term financier is not exactly what it means, right? What it means is that they're literally doing things that are not necessarily legal. That seems to just be a very good title for these people. So never included in either mainstream or the many government inquiries are the deeper ties with the intelligence agencies, such as the 3-letter one in the United States and the other one that starts with an M in the country with the letter I. However, one of these men that was deeply involved with Keating was Carl Lindner Jr. Now, Carl Lindner is very important because he was a 40% shareholder in my abuser's father's company known as Rapid American Corporation. My abuser's father's name is Meshulam Rickless. I haven't seen anybody really talk about the fact that these people are involved in this very troubling history. And sometimes I wonder, are people just gatekeepers? Are they not good researchers? I mean, what is it? I know that I include everyone's name. And if it's an unknown name, I try to find out as much as I can about that person, and I include it because there are some names that just need to be told. Now, Lindner also took over the 3-letter agency run and protected United Fruit after the 1973 end of life of Eli Black. Now, we know Eli Black because basically I was the very first person to write about him, who is Leon Black's father and who was also an Epi financial backer. Not least of all is that during the 1970s, Keating became Lindner's right-hand man. Okay, so Lindner is the powerful one in this scenario. And in fact, well, that'll be for another day. So I included a photograph of Michael Milken being taken away. The 150 billion savings and loan crisis fell onto taxpayers, and it's analogous in terms of the harm caused to ordinary citizens with the scam perpetrated by Elizabeth Holmes and her abuse of power as CEO of Theranos. Now, what I'm going to interject here and say is that we know that David Boies was Elizabeth Holmes' attorney. The other thing I want to say is that the $150 billion savings and loan crisis included Larry King's bank and the sort of the lending institution that he had in Lincoln, Nebraska. Again, I don't really find many people talking about that. I'm going to get back to my article. Withheld from the public during the inquiry into Keating was its connection to Michael Milken of Drexel Burnham Lambert, because by the time the SNL scandal surfaced, the government had already made its deal with Milken. However, a Washington Post article, which I linked to, so in all of my articles you will find receipts, from February 1990 shows the SNL junk bond link with Milken and Drexel. Worth noting is that hours before leaving office, President Donald Trump pardoned Milken. And as mentioned in previous articles, Leon Black was Milken's right-hand man. And so I also, in my Substack, let you know how Leon Black started in his, he didn't start wealthy, but he ended up wealthy, and he was Michael Milken's right-hand man. Okay, so in my article, I'm like, let's go back to the Guggenheims. Daniel Guggenheim established several foundations. The first, in 1924, was the Daniel and Florence Guggenheim Foundation, where they made Harry a director and later its president. Prompted by Lindbergh, meaning our very famous aviator Charles, Harry sponsored Robert H. Goddard's private research into liquid fuel rocketry in space. Now, for those of you who are on my Substack, find the article where I connect this to Ghislaine's family, specifically her two sisters, the twins. That's all the clue I'm going to give you, because everything literally fits like a glove when you start putting this piece next to this piece next to this piece. And I don't think you'll find that anywhere else. And so what I did then was I included a photograph of Harry Guggenheim, Dr. Robert Goddard, and Charles Lindbergh at the launching tower near Roswell. What else happened at Roswell? Right. The so-called crashing of the SPACE ship, right, in 1945. That happened at Roswell. I'm going to just, that's like a plus. I did not include that in my article. The second foundation followed on June 16, 1926, named the Daniel Guggenheim Fund for the Promotion of Aeronautics. In 1928, at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, in Building 33, these people are not nothing if not for their like very overt signals. 33, that is an important number in Masonry, right? So you have the Masonic Freemason who they ascend to level 33. So that's an important number. So at MIT, they created a building 33 and they called it the Daniel Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory. That's basically where it was housed. So without going into a lengthy history, these Guggenheim-funded projects and scientists, including the Nazi Werner von Braun, who borrowed from the work of Goddard, morphed into NASA, which burst onto the scene with Project Mercury and the Apollo program. And so then I'm going to continue. Daniel died in 1930, and among the mourners, and I include a photo of the mourners at his funeral, by the way, who attended his funeral were Samuel Untermeyer. How do we know his name? Untermeyer Park, son of Sam David Berkowitz. Do you see how all of these names, you pull one out of the hat, and it comes up with a bunch of other names and other major historical crimes. Okay, so the other person that showed up was Adolph Oakes, Ochs, if you want to research him, who was born in 1858 through 1935. He was born in Cincinnati, Ohio. Yes, Ohio. It should be on your radar as an intelligence sort of like a hotspot of intelligence operations. And of course, who do we have in Ohio, right? We have our Wexy person. And commencing in August of 1896, he became the publisher of the New York Times. And the other person who attended the funeral was Charles Lindbergh. And if you dig deep enough into the background of any of these men, you're going to find connections to several secret societies. So let's go on to Charles Lindbergh's scandal about the baby. So he was also a eugenics advocate, and we're going to discuss the unaliving of baby Charlie. So retired judge, historian, and true crime author Lise Perlman began investigating whether Lindbergh had sacrificed his son for scientific experiments which led to the toddler's unalivement. Her theory, which holds weight, makes the argument that Lindbergh, a eugenicist, used deceptive tactics from the very beginning of the disappearance of his son. The first two being the photo Lindbergh provided to the authorities of little Charlie. The photos, in fact, that he gave them were two, and they showed the toddler as he looked at age 1, and not the way he really looked when he was allegedly kidnapped. And really, it's allegedly in this case because you have to look at the Lindbergh case through different eyes at this point. The boy had a rare disorder. Remember, I said earlier that these people do not like their private lives to be public. Well, so the Lindberghs kept secrets. You know, they all have double lives. So the child actually did have a rare disorder, and his appearance changed drastically between age 1 and even just 8 months later. According to the pediatric report from his last visit 2 weeks earlier from the date that he disappeared, he was 33 inches tall, meaning very tall for a 1.5-year-old, and not 29 inches as he had been on his first birthday. His curly hair had also been cut short. It was not the way it looked in the photograph. It had been cut short the week earlier. Others who knew the child commented that he looked more like a 3-year-old, therefore not the baby that was being described everywhere, like in the newspapers, on the radio, in the United States, in Europe. And he had also developed an oversized head and other issues indicating, his severe health issues. And then I show a photograph of Lindbergh with his biologist friend, Alexis Carrel, who was also a eugenicist. And this man was a Nobel Prize winning biologist who believed in the sterilization of people they deemed unfit. The goal was to control the human population by removing the feeble-minded, the poor, and the weak, and of course, entire racial and ethnic minorities. The body of little Charlie was found on May 12, 1932, more than 2 months after he disappeared from his crib. Lindbergh had been given the role of lead investigator over the police, which would never happen today. He ordered the cremation of the corpse. Listen to this. He ordered the cremation of his child's body before anybody could really perform an autopsy. So the only thing that happened was there was a partial autopsy, which basically when they went in there to perform the autopsy, there were already organs of the child missing. So that what Charles Lindbergh did was he just took the child's body and he had it cremated before any further testing could be done. Now, if you're not going, oh my God, that's a major red flag, and why did he do that? So Perlman discovered Carroll had access to undesirables, people who were deemed not worthy of being among the living, upon whom he performed medical experiments. He would go off into the streets, find somebody who was poor, and just bring them back into his laboratory and do experiments. I mean, how this is not outrageous and how this is not discussed, I don't know. I mean, in any event, Perlman just arrived at the conclusion that Lindbergh allowed Carroll to operate on the child and that it went horribly wrong, leading to what she refers to as an elaborate hoax perpetuated by Lindbergh himself. And so I did the same research uh, as her, not as extensive, clearly. She did a much deeper thing. She spent a couple of years doing this. However, what I can add is that Lindbergh was known about among his circle as somebody who had a dark side. And so here's his dark side. He was an S addict. He had several different lives, not two, not three, but many different lives. And he used different names for different families that he had. He had 3 mistresses and 3 additional families. He had 7 children with 3 of his German mistresses, in addition to the 6 he had with his wife, Anne. But even this was not enough. He regularly saw his lovers, one of whom was described as the Filipina, meaning she was from the Philippines. She was a stewardess who was 40 years his junior. So frankly, because of all of that, I mean, we're understanding that the elite operate on a different level. And so this should not be surprising. However, even when I uploaded this article about a year ago on my Substack, people, my subscribers, were surprised because they thought of Lindbergh as I had thought of Lindbergh, as some kind of really American hero. Well, he was, it turns out, sadly, not. So I'm going to just, the next caption of this very long article is Modern Day Guggenheim Family and the Dead Fish. That's the heading of the, where we're going now. And so Bert Fields, 1929-2022, was a prominent entertainment attorney whose clients included Harvey Weinstein. He was married to Barbara Guggenheim, sister of Eileen Guggenheim, board chair of the New York Academy of Art. The Guggenheim sisters are the current-day descendants of the once fabulously wealthy Guggenheim family. And so I include photos of the sisters. Weinstein once told the New York Times, in the entertainment business, walking into litigation without Bert Fields is like walking into the Arctic without a jacket. Fields regularly employed notorious private investigator Anthony Pellicano, who was known to use illegal methods much like a 1930s mobster. In June 2002, Anita Bush, then a reporter for the Los Angeles Times, was working on a story about Steven Seagal and Michael Ovitz, both of whom were clients of Pellicano. She discovered a dead fish with a rose in its mouth, along with a note reading "Stop" on the shattered front window of her car. Pellicano was arrested and subsequently indicted on 110 counts. Among his crimes were racketeering, conspiracy, wiretapping, witness tampering, identity theft, and destruction of evidence. He was also found to be in possession of confidential police reports, notably described as being provided to him by corrupt police personnel. Among the many illegal tape recordings found in his home was one of Pellicano telling a man, "If you're a rat, don't even come anywhere near me, 'cause I will hurt you. I don't deal with rats. I am old-style Sicilian, you understand? And I don't want to have nothing to do with any rats." And so, folks, I am going to leave you there with this day's installment. I wanted to give you something because I know a lot of you were asleep when I did my test run on my ability now to live stream. However, it was a lot of fun. Again, I'm waiting to get another microphone that works on the StreamYard platform, because this one, while it does great on Zoom, it doesn't do so great on StreamYard, and I will have everything probably within the next day or so. So that said, thanks again for everything. Give this a like, and we will talk soon. Bye.